December 3rd, 1970, 2 p.m. On the quiet shores of Jeojin Beach, South Korea, the winter silence is shattered by a piercing metallic scream. Fishermen look up to see a silver streak cutting through the low clouds. It is a MiG-15, the iconic Soviet Predator that once dueled with American Sabres over MiG Alley 2 decades prior. But this is not 1950. This is the height of a new, tenser Cold War.
Your subscribe and like support their courage and help spread the truth. Please, listen with your heart.
The aircraft is dying. Its engine, starved of fuel, coughs a final burst of black smoke before going silent. The pilot wrestles the stick, forcing the silver beast onto the wet sand. The impact is violent. The nose gear snaps, tumbling 10 feet away. The right wing digs deep into the shoreline, twisting under the weight of the fuselage. Drop tanks, empty and battered, are crushed like tin cans into the sand. As the dust settles, the canopy slides back. Out steps Major Park Sun-kuk, a Class 1 elite pilot of the North Korean Air Force. His movements are frantic. He reaches into his flight suit, pulls out his identification papers, and sets them ablaze. Within seconds, his name, his rank, and his history are reduced to ash in the sea breeze. Local villagers and a lone official on a motorbike surround the wreckage. Park looks at them and asks a single, low-voiced question. Is this South Korea? To the world, this was the start of a legendary defection to freedom. But to those who knew the secrets of the cockpit, it was the beginning of the most sophisticated cover-up of the century. To understand why the South Korean government was so desperate to turn a crashed jet into a heroic myth, you have to understand the sheer terror of the era. By 1970, the Korean peninsula was a geopolitical powder keg, and the fuse was burning short. Just 2 years prior, in 1968, North Korea had launched a brazen assassination attempt. A 31-man elite commando unit slipped through the heavily fortified DMZ and marched right up to the gates of the Blue House, the South Korean presidential residence. Their stated mission? To slit the throat of President Park Chung-hee. That same year, North Korea captured the USS Pueblo, a US Navy intelligence ship, holding its crew hostage and humiliating the American military. The following year, they shot down an unarmed US EC-121 reconnaissance plane, killing all 31 Americans on board. South Korea was gripped by a suffocating paranoia. The public was terrified. The military was on hair-trigger alert. The government was desperate for a victory, any victory, to prove they were winning this shadow war. So when a North Korean Class 1 pilot literally dropped out of the sky and landed on a South Korean beach without firing a single shot, the KCIA didn't see an accident. They saw a miracle. They saw the ultimate propaganda weapon to demoralize Pyongyang and reassure a terrified South Korean public. They just needed the pilot to play along. News of the landing hit the Blue House like a thunderbolt. South Korea was reeling from years of North Korean provocations, including the brutal raid on the presidential palace just 2 years earlier. A North Korean elite pilot hand-delivering a MiG-15 was a propaganda miracle for President Park Chung-hee's administration. However, behind the celebratory headlines, a Cold War was brewing between allies. Under the Status of Forces Agreement, any North Korean defector and their equipment were to be handed over to US Intelligence within 48 hours. The Americans were hungry. They wanted to strip that MiG down to the last rivet. But the South Korean Central Intelligence Agency, the KCIA, had other plans. They moved Park to a black site in Daebangdong and cut off all American access for 90 days. Michael Lee, a veteran CIA interrogator of Korean descent, watched from the sidelines with growing suspicion. Why 90 days? What were they doing in that room? Lee began to hear whispers from his internal sources. The KCIA wasn't interrogating Park. They were coaching him. They were manufacturing a hero, a script of ideological awakening and a daring escape for freedom. Lee knew that in the world of intelligence, a perfect story is usually a well-constructed lie. Finally, after 3 months of diplomatic pressure from the US Embassy, the KCIA granted the Americans exactly 1 hour, 60 minutes, to find the truth. The man the Americans sent to crack this 90-day wall of lies was no ordinary intelligence officer. Michael Lee was a phantom of the Cold War. As a Korean-born interrogator working for the US 502nd Military Intelligence Battalion, Lee possessed something no American officer had, a deep, visceral understanding of the Korean psyche. Lee was already a legend in the intelligence community. During the 1968 Blue House raid, the only surviving North Korean commando, Kim Shin-jo, had been captured. Kim was a hardened, brainwashed killer. He tried to commit suicide by biting his own tongue and smashing his head against the cell walls, refusing to eat or speak. South Korean interrogators tried everything from torture to bribery. Nothing worked. Then Michael Lee stepped in. Instead of breaking Kim with force, Lee broke him with empathy, shared meals, and long conversations about philosophy, history, and life outside the regime. Lee unspooled the commandos' indoctrination thread by thread. Within weeks, Kim Shin-jo was writing volumes of intelligence that dismantled North Korea's entire special operations network. The KCIA knew exactly who Michael Lee was. They knew that if anyone could slice through the thick layers of coaching they had forced upon Major Park Sun-kuk, it was Lee. That is why they fought so hard to keep him out of that room. But the clock had run out. Lee was going in. In early 1971, Michael Lee arrived at the Daebongdong facility. Before entering the room, he performed a deliberate ritual of cultural erasure. He stripped off his American identity. He didn't bring Marlboros or expensive Parker pens. Instead, he carried a cheap, locally made Monami ballpoint pen and a stack of rough-textured South Korean Air Force forms. He wore the uniform of a South Korean Air Force colonel, with the nameplate Lee Dong-jin. Inside the interrogation room, under the harsh hum of fluorescent lights, sat a hollowed-out Park Sun-kuk. Behind the two-way mirror, KCIA agents held their breath, pens poised to record any deviation from the script. Lee didn't start with ideology. He started with the Brotherhood of the Sky. "Major Park, I am Colonel Lee from Air Force Operations," he said in a low, steady tone. "The KCIA wants a hero, but my generals want answers. You flew right through our impenetrable defenses all the way to Pohang, and we didn't even see you. This is an embarrassment to the ROK Air Force." Lee leaned in, placing the cheap pen on the table. "I don't care about your politics. I care about our radar gaps. If you tell me the real flight path, you aren't a traitor. You are a technical consultant helping us fix our failures. This is a matter of professional honor between pilots." It was a masterstroke of psychology. By offering Park a professional bridge that bypassed political shame, Lee did what the KCIA couldn't do in 3 months. In less than 5 minutes, Park Sun-kuk discarded the script and began to speak the truth. What Park Sun-kuk revealed was not a tale of courage, but a nightmare of aviation physiology. On December 3, 1970, his mission was a simple ferry flight, moving his MiG-15 from Wonsan to a repair depot near Pyongyang, a 15-minute hop. Because he was a Class 1 elite pilot with a chest full of medals, Park grew overconfident. He bypassed the safety checklist and failed to buckle his oxygen mask. He climbed to 30,000 feet to test the engine's performance. At that altitude, a silent killer took hold: hypoxia. It is a treacherous condition that starves the brain of oxygen without the pilot realizing it. It induces a state of euphoria, like being drunk on the sky. Judgment dissolves. Orientation vanishes. Park believed he was heading west toward the repair depot. In reality, his brain had miscalculated the sun's position, and he was screaming south at 500 miles per hour. He flew undetected over the DMZ, deep into South Korean territory, reaching as far as the industrial city of Pohang. When the thicker air of lower altitudes finally cleared his head, he looked down and saw the massive shipyards of Pohang. He was paralyzed with fear. He was 200 miles behind enemy lines with a fuel gauge hitting the red zone. He turned the stick and fled north, but his fuel was gone. He saw a beach and desperately thought it was Wonson's Myeongsasimi Beach in the north. He landed, thinking he was home. It wasn't until he saw the school uniforms of the South Korean children that the crushing reality hit him. He had accidentally landed in the enemy's lap. The reason he burned his papers wasn't a gesture of defection. It was the desperate act of a soldier trying to hide his identity in a land where he expected to be executed.
Let's pause and look at the terrifying military reality of Major Park's hypoxic joyride. The distance from the DMZ to Pohang is roughly 200 miles. A Soviet-built MiG-15 flying deep into South Korean airspace should have triggered a massive response. Sirens should have wailed. Surface-to-air missiles should have tracked it. American F-4 Phantoms and South Korean F-5 Freedom Fighters should have scrambled within minutes to intercept or shoot him down. But the skies remained silent. Why? Because Park's accidental flight exposed a catastrophic blind spot in the joint US-ROK air defense network. Park was flying at an extremely high altitude without a set flight plan, drifting erratically as hypoxia took over his brain. He wasn't flying like an attack aircraft. He was drifting like a ghost. Furthermore, the radar networks of the era were optimized to detect massive, coordinated Soviet-style bomber formations, not a single erratic fighter jet wandering off course. When the top brass in Seoul and the U.S. 8th Army headquarters finally realized a North Korean MiG had flown down their eastern seaboard, loitered over the critical industrial hub of Pohang, and flown back up to Goseong without being challenged, a cold sweat broke out in the command centers. It was an absolute defense failure. If Park had been carrying a tactical nuclear weapon or executing a kamikaze strike on a critical facility, there was absolutely nothing stopping him. This terrifying realization is what truly sealed Major Park's fate. The moment Michael Lee captured this confession on his tape recorder, the door to the interrogation room burst open. KCIA agents, realizing their 90-day masterpiece had been dismantled in an hour, swarmed the room. They seized the recorder and Lee's notes. "Mr. Lee, you have just opened Pandora's box," an official warned him. "If the public finds out a North Korean jet flew to Pohang and back without being caught, this government will fall. This is now a matter of national survival." Lee was threatened with the National Security Act. He was a U.S. official, but he was also a Korean citizen, and the KCIA's reach was long. A high-level deal was eventually struck between the KCIA and US G2 Intelligence. The Americans were also embarrassed that their radar had missed the MiG, so they agreed to the Pact of Silence. The truth was buried. The hypoxia was erased. Major Park Sun-kuk was to be, from that day forward, a glorious freedom fighter. But what happens to the man inside the lie? For Major Park Sun-kuk, survival came at an unimaginable cost. In North Korea, the regime's punishment for defection is absolute and brutal. Under the 3 generations of punishment rule, the family of a traitor is sent to political prison camps, places of starvation, torture, and death. Park knew this better than anyone. When he finally realized he had landed in the South, the agonizing truth hit him. His simple mistake, forgetting an oxygen mask, had likely just signed a death warrant for his parents, his relatives, and everyone he loved back in the North. He didn't choose to sacrifice them for freedom. He sacrificed them by accident. And in South Korea, he was never truly free. Even though he was paraded as a hero and given a commission as a major in the ROK Air Force, he lived in a gilded cage. The KCIA never stopped watching him. His house, his friends, his movements, everything was monitored. He was a highly valuable, highly unstable piece of state propaganda. If he ever got drunk and slipped up, if he ever told a journalist the truth about the Hypoxia and the lost flight, the entire government narrative would collapse. He had to wake up every single morning, look in the mirror, and rehearse the lie. He had to play the part of the brave anti-communist crusader, smiling for the cameras, while carrying the crushing, silent guilt of a son who accidentally destroyed his own family. On June 10, 1971, Park Sun-kuk was commissioned as a major in the South Korean Air Force. The television cameras captured him saluting the flag, a hero of the state. He was given a home, a salary, and a place in the history books. But he lived the rest of his life as a ghost. He was a man imprisoned by a heroic narrative, unable to ever admit the truth of his mistake. For our generation, the Cold War was often a story of clear-cut heroes and villains. But the case of Park Sun-kuk shows the gray reality behind the curtain. His flight was not a journey toward liberty. It was a fatal lapse of judgment by an elite pilot who forgot his oxygen mask, and a political maneuver by a government that preferred a useful lie over an embarrassing truth. Major Park Sun-kuk eventually passed away, never knowing the fate of the family he left behind in the north. Until his dying breath, he took the heavy secret of his manufactured heroism to the grave. It wasn't until over half a century later, through the testimony of an aging Michael Lee, that this incredible truth finally came to light. And it leaves us with a chilling question. In the grinding machinery of the Cold War, how far will a nation go to manipulate a single man's life and truth for the sake of its own interests? The silver MiG-15 that crash-landed on the sands of Goseong in the winter of 1970 did not carry a great thirst for freedom. It carried the fatal mistake of a human being who forgot his oxygen mask, and the ruthless reality of two nations that needed to use that mistake to sell a lie. If you were Major Park Sun-kuk, sitting in that interrogation room in 1970, what would you have done? Would you have spoken the brutal truth and remained a nameless prisoner of war? Or would you have buried your family in your heart and lived the rest of your life wearing the mask of a fake hero? Let us know what you think in the comments below.